The night sky above the forgotten world was red with fire, and the air was heavy with the sound of drums. The ancient tribe gathered around the great stone pillar at the heart of their village, their faces painted with ash, their eyes glowing with fear and devotion. At the center of it all stood the condemned one, a young alien woman, chained by her wrists and ankles, her body bruised and her spirit trembling. The chains were thick, black with rust, yet strong enough to hold her as the tribe chanted in one voice, calling upon their mighty sky lords. The ground shook with every beat of the drum, and sparks of fire danced in the air. The tribe believed that the storm above was the anger of their gods, and that only by blood could peace return to their land. The girl, weak and pale, lifted her eyes to the stars, her voice a whisper that no one could hear. Why me? Why now? But the answer was only thunder, rolling across the mountains like a beast that refused to rest. The old priest raised his staff high, the wood carved with strange runes, and the people fell silent. His voice cracked the air like lightning. The sacrifice must be made. The Sky Lords demand her soul, and through her death we shall live. The crowd roared, some throwing stones at the helpless girl, each rock striking her with pain that echoed deep in her chest. She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her face, the salt mixing with blood, her heart begging for a savior that would never come. Around the pillar, torches blazed, the smoke rising into the sky as if to carry the tribe's prayers. The wind blew strong, whipping the fire until sparks flew toward the heavens. Every sound was filled with doom, every breath she took felt like her last. The girl remembered her childhood, the laughter of her family, the soft voice of her mother, and wondered if they were watching her now from the other side of Lie. Fee, the villagers began to sing a song of sacrifice, low and cruel, a rhythm that told her fate was sealed. Children cried in fear, men shouted for the gods to take her quickly, women covered their faces with trembling hands. The priest stepped closer, lifting a blade of stone that shimmered under the red sky. The girl's heart raced, her eyes wide with terror, the sharp edge of destiny hanging above her. But then, in the distance, something moved. A sound unlike the drums echoed across the valley, a roar of power, a hum of energy. The people froze, turning their heads toward the horizon. Through the clouds, a strange light cut across the sky, fast and unnatural, like a falling star that refused to burn out. The girl opened her eyes, her fear replaced with confusion. Her chains rattled as she leaned forward, desperate to see. The priest cursed and called for silence, warning the tribe not to look, but they could not resist. Above them, the light grew brighter, closer, until it burned across the heavens with a fire none of them had ever seen. The drums stopped, the chanting ended, the only sound left was the howling wind and the heavy breaths of hundreds of souls. The girl felt her heart beat stronger, her eyes fixed on the sky as hope sparked inside her for the first time. The priest shouted that it was a sign of the gods, that the sacrifice must be finished before the omen grew stronger. But the people hesitated, fear fighting against faith, their hands trembling as they clutched their weapons. The light in the sky became a shape, long and sharp, a shadow against the storm. It moved with purpose, cutting through thunder, as if the heavens themselves made way for it. The girl gasped, her chains cold against her skin, for she knew in that moment that fate had shifted. She was no longer alone, no longer just a victim of cruel gods and blind faith. The pillar shook as another rumble rolled across the earth, not from the storm, but from the heavens. The villagers stepped back, some crying, some bowing to the ground. The priest raised his blade again, desperate to finish what had been started, but the girl could not look away. Her eyes locked on the sky where the light burned brighter than fire. And then, breaking through the storm, a ship descended. Its hull was scarred with battles, its engines roared with defiance. The tribe screamed, some calling it a demon, others falling to their knees in worship. But the girl's lips trembled as she whispered a single word, a word she had never spoken before. Human. The drums lay silent, the fire cracked low, and every soul in the village stared at the sky in awe. The sacrifice was no longer just a ritual, it had become the beginning of something far greater. The girl's chains rattled in the wind, her eyes burning with a fragile hope. For the first time in her short life, she felt the story of her people was about to change, and far above, the ship circled, preparing to land, its shadow stretching across the ground like the hand of fate itself. The condemned one, chained and broken, waited as destiny moved closer with every heartbeat. The forgotten world had called for gods, but what answered was a man, and with him came the spark that would defy fate forever. The ship landed beyond the ridge, its engines throwing dust and fire into the sky. The villagers screamed and scattered, some falling to their knees while others hid behind stone walls. The priest shouted that the gods were angry, that the sacrifice must continue, yet his voice trembled as he spoke. The young girl, chained to the pillar, lifted her head, her eyes wide, hope and fear clashing in her heart. From the smoke, a figure appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, covered in a dark survival suit that shimmered under the firelight. He moved with slow steps, not like a god and not like a beast, but like a man who carried his own destiny. The villagers threw stones, their voices rising in panic, but he did not stop. Each rock bounced off his armor, each insult lost in the storm that still growled above them. The human's helmet shifted, revealing his face, a face unlike theirs, pale and scarred by battles, with eyes that burned not with faith but with will. He looked at the chained girl, and in that moment, the noise of the world seemed to fade. Her breath caught, her body trembling, for she had never seen such a creature, never felt such a gaze. He did not see a sacrifice. He did not see a sinner. He saw only a person bound by cruelty. The priest raised his staff, pointing at the human, shouting that the outsider was a curse, a shadow of doom. The crowd roared with fear, and spears were lifted high, sharp tips aimed at the stranger's chest. But the human kept walking, his boots crushing stones, his eyes never leaving the girl. He reached the circle of fire that surrounded the pillar, and with one step, he entered it, as if flames could not touch him. The girl whispered in her broken voice, "Run, they will kill you." The human tilted his head, listening though he did not understand her language, but he understood her fear, he understood her pain, and that was enough. He placed one hand upon the cold iron chain, feeling its weight, and he pulled slightly, testing its strength. The villagers gasped, their mouths wide in shock, for no one had ever dared touch the holy bindings of the sacrifice. The priest's face twisted with rage, and he ordered the warriors forward, their spears shining like teeth in the firelight. The human turned his head, his jaw tight, his body unshaken. From his belt he drew a tool, a piece of human steel that hummed with hidden power. The girl's heart beat faster as sparks danced from the tool, cutting into the chain with a hiss. She could not believe what she was seeing, a stranger fighting her fate, a stranger defying Odes. The warriors rushed in, their voices loud, their feet heavy, but the human swung his arm, striking one spear aside, pushing another warrior to the ground, his strength unmatched by any of them. The crowd screamed, stones flew, but the human did not step back. His tool bit deeper into the chain, the sound sharp and strong. The girl's breath shook, her wrists burning as the iron weakened, her eyes filled with tears, not of pain but of a hope she had buried long ago. Above them, thunder split the sky, louder than before, shaking the earth beneath their feet. The priest raised his stone blade, declaring the gods had come to punish the defiler, but the human ignored him, his focus sharp, his will unbroken, and with a final spark, the chain around the girl's wrist cracked, the sound echoing like lightning through the village. The villagers cried out in terror, some falling flat to the ground, others turning and running. The priest cursed, his voice drowned by the storm as he demanded the sacrifice continue. The human pulled on the broken chain, freeing the girl's other arm, his eyes meeting hers once more. She could not move, her legs weak, her heart torn between fear of gods and faith in this stranger. Then the earth trembled again, heavier, deeper, not from the storm but from something above. The girl lifted her head, her eyes wide, and the human looked up as well. Through the storm clouds, a shadow moved, vast and heavy, with glowing eyes of fire. The villagers screamed, "Sky Lords! Sky Lords!" their voices shaking with terror and devotion. The priest fell to his knees, lifting his arms to the heavens. The warriors dropped their spears, their faith stronger than their fear of death. The girl whispered, her voice shaking, "They are real. The gods are real." The human narrowed his eyes, his jaw hard, for he saw not gods but machines, ancient and merciless. The shadow descended, its body made of steel, its arms filled with weapons that burned with light. The ground split as it landed, crushing stones beneath its weight. The villagers bowed, their voices chant, "Ing," their eyes filled with tears, but the human stepped in front of the girl, placing his body between her and the machine. The girl gasped, her heart leaping, for no one had ever stood against the gods. The human raised his tool again, sparks flashing in the storm, his eyes fixed on the threat. The machine's weapons hummed, glowing brighter as it locked onto them both. And in that moment, she knew her chains were not only broken, her fate itself was being rewritten. The storm roared, the fire burned, and destiny stood upon the edge. The condemned one and the human stranger faced the wrath of heaven, and as the machine prepared to strike, the world held its breath. The story had only just begun, and already the gods were angry. The great machine loomed over the village, its eyes glowing like burning suns, its body made of steel older than memory. The tribe knelt, pressing their faces to the ground, chanting words of worship, begging their gods to forgive them. But the human did not kneel. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his face set like stone, and before him, the young girl clung to the pillar, her chains broken but her body too weak to run. The machine's voice cracked the air, a deep metallic roar that shook the ground. Weapons hummed on its arms, glowing brighter with each passing second. The priest cried out that the gods had come to judge them, that the stranger would burn for his crime. But the human did not look away, his eyes fixed on the glowing beast as he stepped forward, placing himself between the machine and the girl. The villagers shouted for him to flee. Some threw stones, others prayed louder, but he did not move. He reached down, lifted the broken chains and wrapped them around his fists, turning weakness into a weapon. The girl gasped, her voice shaking. "You cannot fight the Sky Lords." He turned his head slightly, his scarred face lit by the fire, and though she could not understand his words, she understood his meaning. He would not surrender. The machine fired its first blast. A beam of burning light that scorched the ground beside them. Flames leapt high, smoke filled the air, villagers screamed and scattered. The human shielded the girl with his body, pulling her close, dragging her from the pillar as fire rained around them. His boots crushed burning wood, his breath steady, his hands tight on the chains. The priest howled, calling the villagers to seize the girl again, to drag her back to the pillar. But the people hesitated, fear of the machine stronger than their faith. Some ran, some froze, and a few dared to step forward, spears raised, eyes filled with hate for the stranger. The human turned, swinging the chain with a sharp crack, striking one warrior across the chest and sending him sprawling. The girl cried out, her voice torn between terror and awe, for she had never seen such defiance. The machine roared again, its weapons locking onto them, its shadow stretching long across the burning ground. The human pulled her forward, forcing her to run though her legs stumbled, each step heavy with pain. Behind them, the pillar cracked, the flames consuming the wood, sparks flying into the sky like stars torn from the heavens. Another blast struck near them, throwing stones and fire into the air. The girl fell, her body trembling, but the human lifted her with one arm, refusing to leave her behind. He dragged her through smoke and ash, his chest rising and falling like iron. She looked at him with wide eyes, her voice breaking. Why do you help me?" He could not answer her words, but he answered with his actions. He placed her behind him, standing tall once more, his chain whip ready, his eyes fixed on the metal god. The villagers cried out in madness, their faith collapsing, their world breaking apart before their eyes. The priest screamed for them to rise, to fight, to kill the outsider, but his words were swallowed by fear. The machine lowered itself, its arms glowing brighter, each weapon humming like 1,000 storms. The human's breath came slow and steady, his grip on the chain tight, his body ready for death yet unwilling to bend. The girl's heart raced, her chains clinking as she crawled closer, desperate to stand beside him. But the ground shook, stones split, and the machine opened its chest, revealing a core of light brighter than the sun. The villagers fell flat to the ground, crying out for mercy, calling it the heart of a god. The priest wept, his staff clattering to the earth, his faith twisting into fear. The girl felt her soul sink, for no man could fight such power. No mortal could stand against the fury of the Sky Lords. But the human did not step back. He raised his chain high, sparks flashing in the firelight, defiance burning in his eyes. The machine fired, a wave of light tearing across the ground. The girl screamed, the villagers cried, the sky itself seemed to split. But when the smoke cleared, the human still stood, his armor cracked, his body burned, yet his spirit unbroken. He roared back at the machine, his voice strong, his will louder than thunder. The villagers stared in silence, their belief shattered, their eyes wide. For the first time they saw a man defy their gods, a man who refused to kneel. The girl clutched her broken chains, her heart pounding, knowing fate itself had been torn apart. The human turned to her, his hand reaching down, pulling her to her feet once more. Behind them the machine charged again, weapons glowing like fire from the stars. But together they stood, no longer victim and stranger, but two souls bound by defiance. The priest screamed that doom was upon them, that no one could survive the wrath of the Sky Lords. But the girl no longer listened, her eyes locked on the human, her heart whispering that perhaps he was the answer her people had prayed for all along. The machine roared, the earth shook, and the night burned with light. Yet in the middle of chaos, one man and one girl stood side by side, refusing to bow. The pillar of sacrifice lay in ruins, the chains broken, the old ways shattered, and with every step of defiance, a new story began to rise, one where fate itself could be challenged. The metal god towered over the burning village, its glowing eyes sweeping across the people who bowed before it. Its body was huge, its chest shining with a heart of fire, its arms heavy with weapons older than the tribe's memory. The earth shook with each step it took, stones splitting, huts collapsing, flames rising higher with every breath of its engines. To the villagers, it was the Sky Lords in flesh, A divine machine come to claim blood and loyalty. The priest cried out, his voice breaking, "Bow! Bow! The Sky Lords demand it!" The people pressed their faces to the ground, their voices shaking with prayers, but the human did not bow. He stood tall, his body bruised and burned, his hand gripping the broken chain like a weapon. The girl clung to his side, her wrists raw from the shackles, her eyes wide as she whispered, "We must run. We cannot fight this." The machine's chest opened, light blazing like a second sun. Its roar was louder than thunder, sharper than a blade. It fired, and the blast tore across the ground, sending dust and fire in every direction. Huts exploded, warriors were thrown aside like dry leaves. Screams filled the night as the people scattered in terror. The human pulled the girl into his arms, shielding her with his body. The fire struck behind them, scorching the stone, shaking the very pillar that once held her captive. She stared at him in disbelief, her lips trembling. "Why do you protect me? Why do you fight our gods?" He did not answer with words, but his eyes told her the truth. He was not fighting for gods, he was fighting for her. The priest rose to his feet, his voice breaking as he called the human a curse. He shouted that the outsider had brought this wrath upon them, that only the sacrifice could stop the storm. But the people no longer listened. Their faith was cracking like the chains that once bound the girl. Fear spread like fire. Doubt burned brighter than their prayers. The machine raised its arm, a cannon glowing with deadly light. The human stood firm, his chain whip sparking as it struck the ground. The girl clutched his arm, pulling him back, but he refused to move. His heart roared with courage, his body ready to face death if it meant defiance. The blast fired, a beam of energy ripping through the ground. The villagers screamed. The priest fell to his knees. The air shook with the sound of destruction. But when the smoke cleared, the human still stood, covered in ash, his armor cracked but his will unbroken. He roared back at the machine, his voice carrying through fire and thunder, a voice that told the tribe their gods could bleed. The girl's heart pounded, her tears falling, for she had never seen such strength. Her people had lived in chains of fear for generations, but now one man was breaking those chains with nothing but his will. The machine turned, its weapons charging again, its steps crushing the earth as it moved closer. The human grabbed her hand, pulling her with him as they ran through smoke and rubble. The villagers watched, torn between faith and fear. Some crawled after them, others bowed lower to the machine. The priest shouted curses, his eyes wild, his staff raised to the sky. But the girl and the human did not stop, their feet pounding the earth as fire followed them. The machine's roar chased them, its shadow stretching long across the broken ground. They reached the edge of the village, where the stone cliffs rose, like black teeth against the sky. The girl pointed to a narrow path hidden by vines, her voice weak. "There, through the rocks, it leads to the caves." The human nodded, pulling her toward safety, but the ground shook again as the machine landed behind them. Its massive arms tore through huts, its glowing chest casting light across the cliffs. The villagers screamed louder, some running into the woods, some throwing themselves into the dirt. The priest called out, demanding the gods take the girl and leave them in peace. But the machine did not listen. It was no god, no listener of prayers. It was a weapon bound to its ancient orders. The human knew this truth, his eyes narrowing as he dragged the girl into the hidden path. Stones fell around them, fire rained from the sky, the machine's blasts tearing holes into the cliffs. The girl stumbled, her body weak, but the human lifted her, carrying her as he ran. Her tears fell onto his armor, her voice breaking, "You will die for me." But he only tightened his grip, his silence telling her that some fates were worth defying. Behind them, the village burned, its people broken between fear and faith. The priest screamed until his voice cracked, his cries lost in the roar of the machine. The girl looked back once, seeing her home destroyed, her people lost, her old life buried under smoke and flame. Her heart ached, but her soul burned with something new, a fire born not from gods, but from defiance. The machine roared again, its steps shaking the cliffs, its weapons glowing brighter. The human glanced at it once more, his jaw hard, his body tense. Then he turned back to the girl, pushing her deeper into the shadows of the path, for the wrath of the Sky Lords was far from over, and the true battle was only beginning. The cliffs shook as the metal god roared, its voice echoing through the valley like the cry of 1,000 storms. The human pulled the girl into the narrow path, his boots pounding against loose stones, his breath steady, even as fire rained from behind. The girl stumbled, her body weak, her legs trembling, yet he did not let go of her hand. Every blast from the machine tore into the rocks, sending shards flying, the path collapsing behind them with thunderous crashes. The villagers cried in the distance, their voices fading as smoke swallowed the village. Some called to the gods, others cursed the human's name, but all were powerless. The priest's shouts were lost in the fire, his staff raised toward the burning sky. But none of it mattered, for the girl and the stranger were no longer part of their world. Their path was now one of survival. The hidden trail twisted between sharp cliffs, vines hanging like curtains, shadows wrapping them in darkness. The girl gasped for breath, her chains rattling with each step, her voice trembling. "I cannot go further." The human paused, turning to her, his scarred face calm though the world burned behind them. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, his strength unshaken even as the cliffs crumbled. Above them, the machine fired again, beams of light slicing through stone. A section of the path shattered, rocks tumbling into the abyss below. The girl clung to him, her heart racing, her voice breaking. "It will kill us both." But the human's eyes stayed sharp, his steps sure, as if he had faced death too many times to fear it now. They reached the mouth of a cave, hidden deep within the cliffs. Its entrance glowed faintly with strange markings, symbols that pulsed as if alive. The girl's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. "The sacred caves, the forbidden place. No one enters and returns." The human did not hesitate. He carried her inside, his shadow swallowed by the glowing walls. The machine roared, its massive body forcing itself into the cliffs, its arms tearing at the stone. Rocks fell as it tried to follow, its weapons glowing hot. Terror, its roar shaking the mountains, but the narrow entrance was too small for its bulk, and it clawed at the earth in rage. The girl pressed her face into the human's chest, her tears hot, her voice shaking. "It will not stop, it will never stop." Inside the cave, the air was heavy with silence, yet alive with strange energy. The walls shimmered with glowing lines, shapes that twisted like rivers of light. The human placed the girl gently on the ground, his eyes scanning the walls with focus. He touched one of the glowing marks, and it responded, flaring brighter as if recognizing him. The girl gasped, covering her mouth. "These are not gods. These are memories." Her people had always feared the caves, told stories of spirits that devoured the living. But now she realized the truth. These were ruins, the bones of something far older than her tribe. Her heart trembled, for her ancestors had forgotten, and in their forgetting, they had chained themselves to fear. The ground shook again, the machine outside pounding the earth, its weapons firing into the cliffs. Dust rained down, the walls cracked, but the cave seemed to resist, its symbols glowing stronger. The human turned to her, his expression unreadable, yet calm. He reached out his hand, pulling her close, his voice low, though she could not understand the words. His meaning was clear, he would not abandon her. The girl looked into his eyes, her fear clashing with hope, her heart torn. She whispered in her own tongue, "Why do you fight for me? Why do you not run?" He did not answer with speech. Instead, he pointed toward the deeper tunnel, the place where the light grew brighter. Her body trembled, but she nodded, for she understood. Their only path was forward. Together they moved deeper, the tunnel opening into a vast chamber. The floor was smooth metal, the walls curved like the belly of a ship. Strange machines lay silent in the corners, covered in dust, yet still humming faintly. The girl gasped, her hands shaking. "This is not a cave, this is a vessel." The human's eyes narrowed, recognition flashing across his face. He ran his hand along the walls, finding panels, switches, forgotten tools. The symbols glowed brighter where he touched, responding to him as if he carried a key long lost. The girl stepped closer, her chains clinking, her voice whispering, "My people worshipped gods, but they were only machines, machines built by our ancestors." Outside, the machine's roars echoed through the cliffs, its rage unending. It pounded the mountainside, rocks collapsing, the cave shaking as if the earth itself would split. The girl cried out, clutching the human's arm, fear rising again. But the chamber around them came alive, lights blinking, engines rumbling deep beneath the stone. The human pressed his hand against a glowing panel, and the ground vibrated with power. Dust fell from the ceiling, the walls shone brighter, machines hummed like awakening beasts. The girl's eyes widened, her breath quick. "You are waking it, the old ship, the forgotten sky." The human's face remained calm, but in his eyes burned fire, fire not of worship, but of defiance. Outside, the machine screamed, its glowing core shining brighter, preparing its final strike. The villagers far below cried out, torn between faith and terror, their voices rising into the storm. The priest lifted his staff, tears streaming, his voice breaking, "The gods will kill us all." But deep inside the mountain, a new sound thundered, the sound of ancient engines rising from the dead. The girl clutched the human's hand, her tears mixed with hope, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" The chamber roared with life, the lights blazing, the air filled with power. The forgotten vessel stirred like a beast awakening from long sleep, and as the walls shook, the wrath of the Skylords met the defiance of man. The chamber trembled with hidden life, its walls glowing with ancient light, its floor humming like the breath of a giant awakening. The girl clung to the human's arm, her wide eyes filled with both terror and wonder. Never in her short life had she seen such things. Never had she believed the stories whispered by elders. Her people had spoken of forbidden caves, cursed places where the gods lived. But this was no curse. This was truth. The human stepped forward, his boots echoing against smooth metal. His eyes scanned the walls, his fingers brushing over panels that flickered at his touch. He seemed to know these symbols, or at least he understood them more than she ever could. Where her tribe saw fear, he saw a map, a machine, a weapon. The girl whispered in her own tongue, her voice trembling, "This is not the house of gods. This is the house of our ancestors." The walls glowed brighter as if answering her words, lines of light racing across the metal like veins of fire. Strange shapes emerged from the darkness, long-dead consoles flickering back to life, seats covered in dust, glass screens crackling with faint images. Her people had forgotten, but the truth was here, buried under rock and fear, waiting for someone brave enough to awaken it. Behind them, the cliffs shook, the roar of the machine outside still tearing at the mountain. The wrath of the Skylords had not ended. Its weapons fired again and again, desperate to break into the cave. The girl trembled, covering her ears as stones cracked and dust rained down. But the chamber resisted, its walls strong, its heart alive, protecting its secrets from the rage outside. The human walked toward the center of the room, where a large panel pulsed with blue light. He placed his hand upon it, and the ship answered with a deep hum, a sound older than the tribe's oldest songs. The floor shifted, hidden machinery saw. Tired, and air rushed like a storm. The girl gasped, clutching her broken chains, her heart racing. "You are waking it, you are waking the sky." The panel lit up with strange shapes, symbols she could not read, but the human's eyes narrowed, his mind sharp, his lips whispering words she did not understand. It was as if he had seen such things before, as if his kind had touched this power once in another time. He pressed more buttons, pulled levers, and the chamber shone brighter, the entire cave alive with movement. The girl stepped closer, her hand brushing the walls, the light running beneath her fingertips. Visions filled her mind, images of her ancestors not as worshippers, but as travelers. They walked among stars, they sailed across black skies in ships like this. Her knees weakened, her voice breaking. "We were never meant to bow, we were meant to fly." The human turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, and though no words could bridge their languages, she understood. He nodded once, strong and calm, as if telling her that the chains of her people were broken forever, her heart filled with fire, a fire not of fear but of hope. For the first time she believed they were not condemned, not cursed, but lost children of the stars who could rise again. The machine outside screamed, its weapons glowing brighter, its fury growing. The ground shook so violently that cracks split the chamber, sparks rained from the ceiling. The girl fell to her knees, crying out, "It will destroy us, it will kill us here." But the human reached down, pulling her up, his grip firm, his face hard, telling her silently to trust him. Together they stood at the central console as the ship's systems roared louder. Screens flickered, showing maps of the sky, strange stars, glowing paths stretching across the galaxy. The girl's eyes widened, tears running down her face. "The sky, it remembers you." Yes, it remembers the way. The human tapped one last control and the ground beneath them shook as engines deep below the mountain roared to life. The villagers outside screamed in terror, some believing the gods were rising, others running for their lives. The priest fell to the dirt, his voice broken as he cried that the end had come. The machine fired again, its glowing beams slamming into the cliff. But this time the ship answered. From deep within the cave, shields of light burst outward, stopping the blast, sending sparks flying across the sky. The girl clung to the human, her chains rattling, her body shaking. "It is alive. It is protecting us." The ship pulsed brighter, its walls vibrating, its engines rumbling louder. The machine outside screamed, its glowing eyes furious, its weapons charging for another strike. But the ship's power only grew, as if it had waited centuries for this moment. The human looked at her once more, his hand tightening on hers. She stared back, her fear fading, her heart burning. Together they turned toward the front of the chamber, where a vast window began to clear. Through it they saw the storm, the burning village, the metal god outside. The girl gasped, her breath caught in her throat. "It will kill us both." But the human shook his head, his eyes sharp, his body steady. He pointed toward the glowing controls, toward the heart of the ship, and she understood. They would not die here. They would rise. The machine outside roared, its cannon ready to fire. The villagers fell to their knees, the priest screamed louder than ever. But inside the cave, the forgotten ship awoke fully, its engines thundering, its lights blazing like a new sun, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the people of the forgotten world were about to fly again. The ancient ship roared awake, its engines thundering deep inside the mountain. The ground shook, the cliffs cracked, and the glowing lights of the chamber blazed like a rising sun. The girl clung to the human, her heart racing as the forgotten vessel answered their call. For centuries, her people had bowed to machines as gods, but now one of those machines was about to face defiance. Outside, the metal god screamed, its glowing eyes locking onto the cliff, its cannons hummed with deadly fire, its arms tearing stone apart in rage. The villagers fell to the ground, torn between worship and terror. The priest raised his staff, his voice trembling. The gods battle each other. We are nothing but dust. The human's hands moved quickly across the glowing console, his fingers pressing symbols the girl could not read. The ship shivered, its engines roaring louder, its shields flashing with light. The girl's chains rattled as she gripped his arm, her voice breaking. It is alive, but will it fight for us? The human turned, his eyes steady, his face calm, and she understood without words, he would make it fight. The mountains split as the ship rose, rocks falling, dust filling the air. The villagers cried out, shielding their eyes from the blinding light. The priests screamed that the world was ending, that no one could survive the wrath of gods. But the girl knew better. She saw it with her own eyes. Gods could bleed, and fate could be broken. The ship tore free from the cliffs, its wings spreading wide, its shadow covering the burning village. Engines roared like thunder, flames rolled beneath it, and the air vibrated with power. The metal god raised its weapons, firing beams of fire into the sky, but the ship's shields flared, catching the blasts, sending sparks flying like falling stars. The girl stumbled to the window, her breath stolen by the sight. Her world below burned, her people cried, her past lay in ashes. But beside her stood the human, unbroken, unbowed, and because of him, she was free. Her voice trembled. I was condemned, I was chained, but now I fly. The machine outside screamed again. Its fury endless, its power immense. It leapt into the air, its engines flaring, chasing the rising ship. The human tightened his grip on the controls, his scarred hands steady. The girl placed her trembling hand over his, her chains falling loose to the floor. Together they pulled, and the ship responded. Weapons long silent came alive, glowing with forgotten strength. The machine fired first, beams of fire tearing across the sky. The ship answered, a blast of light surging from its cannons, striking the metal god with a roar. The villagers below gasped, their eyes wide, for the god they had worshipped was wounded. Its armor cracked, its glowing eyes dimmed, its voice no longer invincible. The priest fell to his knees, his staff slipping from his hand, his faith crumbling like dust in the wind. The girl pressed closer to the window, her voice fierce. You are no god. You are only a machine, and we are free. The battle raged in the storm, beams of fire clashing, the sky itself burning with light. The ship shook, its shields sparking, the human gritting his teeth as he held the controls steady. The girl held on beside him, her heart racing, her fear replaced with fire. Every blast, every strike was not just survival, it was defiance. It was rebellion against fate. At last the ship's cannons flared brighter than ever before. The human pulled hard, the girl adding her strength, and together they unleashed the final strike. A beam of light tore through the machine, splitting it apart, its roar fading into silence. The villagers below watched in awe as their god fell, crashing into the mountainside, fire swallowing it whole. The girl cried out, her voice breaking with tears, but not of sorrow, of victory. The human slumped back in his seat, his chest rising and falling, his eyes tired but alive. The ship soared higher, breaking through the storm, its engines glowing against the black sky. The girl wiped her tears, her lips whispering, the chains are broken, and fate has changed. But as the clouds parted, her joy faltered, for above them too. Stars were not empty, they burned with distant lights, moving, glowing, alive, more machines, more ancient gods awakening one by one across the heavens. Her hand tightened on the human's, her voice trembling. This was only the beginning. The human looked out into the endless dark, his eyes calm, his jaw strong. He had broken one chain, but he knew there were many more to shatter. The girl stood beside him, her heart no longer the heart of a victim, but the heart of a leader. Together they faced the stars, ready to defy every fate written for them. The forgotten world burned below, but in the sky a new story had begun. The condemned had risen, the chains were gone, and a human had taught them to fight. The gods had fallen, and the stars themselves trembled, for when one human defies fate, the universe itself must change.